Welcome to the TCF World Podcast. I'm Thanasi Kambanis. I'm in Beirut, joined by my colleague Michael Wahid Hanna and our guest today, Rohan Advani. Rohan, you're going to tell us today about one of the unknown behemoths that affects geopolitics, security, and economics in the Middle East, the Dubai Ports World. What is DP World?
DP World is one of the biggest logistics operator. It's a global port operator that was established in, it traces its roots to the 1970s, and it operates ports all around the world, South America, Africa, Middle East, South Asia, and it has a host of companies under its governance structure throughout the world, including in Europe. And so this company is expanding all over, and especially now in the Horn of Africa, in the autonomous regions of Somalia, such as Somaliland and Puntland. And while this may seem just like neutral economic projects, they're in fact operating in a highly contested geopolitical zone where there is, it's been overlaid with GCC rivalries. So there's Turkish investments, Qatari investments, Saudi investments into this area. And it's creating quite a fraught geopolitical area.
You've written this paper for us talking about DP World and their activity in the Horn. And I'm interested in the interaction between the economic and the geopolitical. What can you tell us about how DP World makes its decisions? What's its connection to the Emirates and Emirati foreign policy?
I mean, I want to start by saying that obviously things in the United Arab Emirates are relatively opaque. So it's hard to know the exact relationship between DP World and the state, or even the rulers of Dubai. But what we do know from the governance structure is that DP World is owned 80% by Dubai World, which is basically the investment arm of the government of Dubai. And so
it's a really modest name for a company.
And so it obviously is, the ruling family has pretty much ultimate control. The thing about the UAE is that state and private capital are very much blurred. So the CEO of DP World, Ahmed bin Sulayem, comes from a very prominent business family. His father was a close advisor to the Maktoum family. And since 2009, following the bankruptcy, basically, of Dubai World and the bailout from Abu Dhabi, we know that decision-making processes, especially with regards to foreign policy, have become increasingly more coherent with regards to Abu Dhabi's control over the rest of the federal Emirates. And so in terms of the relationship between an economic entity, commercial entity such as DP World, I try to make the argument that essentially with regards to trade routes, logistics supplies, ports, these are not simply economic ventures. They require a whole host of security arrangements. If a cargo ship is moving from one place to another, it will need protection on some level. When an investment occurs in a certain place, that comes with a whole host of security implications for that region, in which it opens the door for further Emirati political control.
So is this economic decision-making, looking at investment opportunities, then producing geopolitical results? Is it a convergence of the economic and the geopolitical? I mean, is the idea about access, logistics, about building out warfighting capacity, or is that a secondary concern that then grows out of economic decisions?
Well, I think that they come together. I'll start with talking about what exactly DP World's bread and butter is, right? So they are a logistics giant and they operate ports all over the world. So what they'll be responsible for doing is they'll win a contract somewhere, they'll develop a port, they'll maybe subcontract to dredge the port so it can take in bigger container ships. They'll do some land reclamation so that they can build more areas to store containers and so on. And so this sort of seems like just a commercial endeavor. But as we know, I mean, in somewhere like Somaliland, which is, as I said, very geopolitically fraught, it's close to the battlefield in Yemen, these things come together, right? And so it's not a coincidence that soon after the DP World signed this contract to operate the Berbera port with the government of Somaliland, that the Emirates signed a 25-year agreement to lease and refurbish the civilian airport and naval base in Somaliland, and soon after awarded a $90 million contract to an Emirati company to basically, build out this naval base. And so, in effect, I mean, the commercial port is going to be intertwined because in some sense, military operations are actually complex logistical operations. And in addition to that, they're also acting like a state. They're building hospitals, they're sending over doctors who are paid for, they are building water facilities, they're building highways. So, they are, it's not simply just a commercial endeavor to move cargo. Far from it, actually. Instead, what I try to show in this article is that they are deeply intertwined in both processes of state building and sort of imperial military expansionism in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea.
So, that kind of, that scope of investment in these economies is then creating a lot of political influence. And of course, Somaliland operates autonomously. This isn't an investment decision that is running through a central government. Obviously, that's not what's happening. So, what can we say about what this does in terms of the ability of the Emirates to project political power or influence on this part of Africa?
So I think it's really interesting with regards to these autonomous areas such as Somaliland and Puntland, because clearly the UAE and DP World is not working through the federal government. In fact, the federal government was so angry with a lot of these deals that they actually banned DP World from operating in Somalia as a whole. But that obviously doesn't matter in a place that you don't actually have control over. And so what it shows is that...
Why did the central government not want them there?
Because they think that... Well, there's a host of reasons. One is that this is part of this growing GCC rivalry, whereby the federal government had been receiving Qatari and Turkish assistance. And they also fear that these large infrastructural projects that sort of exclude the federal government are going to further cement the independence of these breakaway states, which is something that they're generally quite opposed to.
Well, so you mentioned this competition, and of course, you talk about Turkey and Qatar and their relationship with Somalia proper. And the Emiratis obviously are not the only player in this space. Could you maybe just sketch out quickly, the kind of contours of that outside investment and how then that has kind of transposed regional rivalries onto the Horn?
Yeah. So if you look at Somalia, the federal government has received considerable Qatari and Turkish investments, but it's also interesting to note that it was also receiving Emirati assistance, especially with regards to security. However, in recent years, it's becoming increasingly fractured, and the country is sort of being pulled towards the polarization of the GCC rivalries, whereby some of the federal states, such as Somaliland and Puntland, are becoming increasingly closer to the UAE. The federal government in Mogadishu is much closer to Qatar and Turkey. And outside Somalia, Qatar and Turkey invested something to the tune of $3 billion in the port in Sudan. The UAE has been has a military base in Assab in Eritrea, and they obviously played an instrumental role in sort of the first rounds of negotiations between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And in Djibouti, which was one of DP World's first international commercial ventures, problems arose about bribery, and then the Djibouti government sold its share in the port to a Chinese company, and then later it expropriated its assets of the port and finally nationalized the company in 2018, undermining DP World's operations there. So I think that these large fixed commercial ventures are important to understanding what's the backdrop onto which GCC rivalries are then later overlaid.
We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
What exactly would a progressive foreign policy look like in the Middle East? What can governments do differently and better? Critiques are easy. Providing realistic policy proposals is harder. I'm Michael Wahid Hanna, and with my colleagues and collaborators here at the Century Foundation, we're trying to answer the hard policy questions with specific, concrete proposals. You can see our ideas and join the conversation on our website, tcf.org.
You're listening to the TCF World Podcast. I'm Thanassi Kambanis here in Beirut with Michael Wahid Hanna and our guest, Rohan Advani.
So, Rohan, we were talking a little bit about the kind of backdrop of competition, and I'm interested to know a little bit more your thoughts on whether now the Gulf crisis is providing a further impetus to this competition. Are we now seeing this spill over in a way that is fueling further economic and security activity? Are we seeing a kind of intensification in the Horn as another arena in which the Gulf crisis can play out?
Definitely. I think that the Gulf crisis, the splits between the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and then Qatar and, let's say, Turkey, are definitely intensifying what's going to happen in the Horn, because it's another... I mean, first of all, we have to remember that these states are pouring a lot of money into cash-strapped governments in the Horn. And so it's a way of tying various political elements in the Horn to outside powers, which creates a number of path dependencies that are sometimes very hard to break out of. And so it's undoubtedly creating more rivalries in regards to commercial developments, security arrangements. But I also want to make it quite clear that GCC rivalries are not the main cause of what's going on in the Horn of Africa, but they are just a more recent driver of further instability.
Well, so on that point, instability, these are huge sums of money that are being invested. They have security overtones. There is this not even a backdrop anymore of regional competition. How destabilizing might this be? I mean, if we're talking about this sets of regional crises, you have an area of Africa that has hosted proxy wars in the past. Does this have the capacity, the possibility to tip into something much more serious, or is this? Do you think? And I'm asking you not to prognosticate totally, but do you think this has the possibility of tipping into something a more overt conflict, or is this really going to occupy a kind of commercial competition?
I don't want to rule out the possibility of it spilling into an overt conflict. I'll give you one example. For example, DP World in Puntland, recently one of their, a port director, his name was Paul Anthony Formosa, he was murdered, shot dead by gunmen posing as fishermen, who then Al-Shabaab later claimed responsibility. However, in a recent New York Times article, they found leaked audio of a businessman and basically implying that Qatar was behind this. Right? Now, I don't want to go too much into the rumors. We don't know exactly what happened, but this is one possible implication of this geopolitical rivalry. That's an occurrence of violence. I think that if violence does happen, it'll definitely be more on the proxy level. How that will actually look is still unclear, and I think that we definitely don't want to overstate, the fact that this could easily slip into violence just because of these rivalries. Rivalries exist in many places. They can be contained. Often compromises come as a result of rivalries. So we just don't know yet.
The UAE has been keen to highlight the ways in which it thinks it's playing a kind of positive political role in the region. Does this provide the UAE an opportunity at a time when its international reputation has taken a hit because of things like the war in Yemen, the war in Libya, the Gulf crisis? Is this an arena perhaps where the UAE can exercise a more responsible diplomatic role?
I mean, it could. I wouldn't want to rule it out. We saw positive signs of its sort of mediating role with regards to the initial rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, though the status of that now is relatively unclear. And then also, its decision to pull out of the war in Yemen was quite astute. I think it saw which way the winds were blowing. However, at the same time, we don't know what that withdrawal really looks like. I mean, it's sort of cemented control in terms of in terms of projecting power over maritime routes. It's got it's backing a strong force in southern Yemen. But I mean, on the whole, I'm actually relatively skeptical because, judging from its history, I mean, it's aggressively expanding, and we have to remember, these are rivaling geopolitical powers. That's obviously not to rule out that there can't be times of cooperation, but these are also capitalist economies that structurally are going to compete with one another, and that can play out as geopolitical rivalries sometimes.
At a time when the focus of politics is on being the loudest voice and not the most informed, the Century Foundation delivers thoughtful, evidence-based policy leadership with purpose. I'm Lucy Muirhead, Chief Strategy Officer at the Century Foundation. We work to reduce inequality, foster opportunity, and promote peace and security, carrying on a tradition that TCF's founder began in 1919. In the century ahead, we'll continue to prioritise rigour over reactivity, elevate the best ideas and most diverse voices, and never lose sight of what it takes to make an impact.
You're listening to TCF World Podcast. I'm Thanassi Kambanis, and I'm here with my colleague, Michael Wahid Hanna. We're talking to Rohan Advani about DP World. Should we understand DP World as like a latter-day British East India or Dutch East India company, like a vertically integrated arm of the state, or a sort of public-private partnership that is about projecting power as much as it is about making money?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that analogy for quite a while, and it's attractive, but I don't think it actually gets what is really happening. I mean, I'm not an expert in the history of the British East India Company, but the British East India Company was very influential in India from the 17th century to the mid 19th century, but it took the Indian Rebellion of 1857 for it to be dissolved, which then later the British state directly administered control. A better way to look at it is as this is an imperial formation where state and capital are converging, and we're seeing the effects of this, especially in the periphery, where you can have a quote-unquote neutral commercial entity that is fully integrated into a military arrangement. So I don't want to say that DP World is simply a puppet of the state. It clearly has its own interests, and I'm sure that they can contradict with those of the Emirates. And at the same time, DP World ultimately has to rely on the military guarantees of the Emirati state. It doesn't have its own, military capacities or anything like that.
So does it actually make money for the Emirates? Is this a profitable enterprise?
DP World is an extremely profitable company, and it's important for the Dubai Emirate. It not only does it make money from its overseas investments, but it owns Jebel Ali port, which is the 9th biggest port in the world and by far the biggest port in the Middle East. In December 2014, DP World also agreed to purchase the Jebel Ali Free Zone for $2.6 billion, thereby integrating logistical functions and gaining ownership over an infrastructure that accounts for more than 20% of Dubai's GDP.
That's a huge number. One of the things I'm curious about, I mean, we talk about these companies, we talk about DP World, and we also often talk about Chinese infrastructure investments in ports and other major projects as if they are somehow, I'm not saying you're doing this, but people often equate this with direct political power and influence, and they also often assume that these kinds of sort of economic bases are functionally the same or similar in terms of power projection to military bases. And I just want to ask, as you referred earlier to the nationalization of one of these in Djibouti, and it's then being reassigned to the Chinese. Are these assets even more so than military bases things that can sort of vanish overnight if the political climate changes and the host government decides to ally with a company from a different place?
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's very important to note that, commercial ports are not the same thing as military bases by any means. I mean, I've explained that they're more connected than we may think, right? I mean, military operations have a large logistical element to them. But I think that commentators often take these agreements and contracts at face value and equate that with being political control. I mean, DP World has many ports in South Asia, in Latin America. That doesn't mean that they have political control over those areas. Now, that's not to say that these ports don't mean anything, right? Like, after the Indian military moved in its forces to Kashmir, we saw a very loud silence from the Emiratis. I think actually the Emirati ambassador to India said, that this is an internal matter. And I'm sure that is not disconnected from their commercial operations there. But at the same time, as we know from what's happening in terms of nationalization, they don't have a lock over these ports. I mean, I think that's one thing that we should keep in mind.
You've mentioned this a few times, but the linkage between the economic and the kind of logistical angle to war fighting, and some of these ports have been quite important for the war in Yemen. Maybe if you could just sketch out the kind of role that they have played in the ongoing conflict.
Yeah, I think it's worth actually going back slightly. So if you look at the Red Sea region, following the war on terror, in 2003, the United States government sets up Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti as the head of its counter-terrorist operations in the Horn of Africa. Then in 2008, you have an increase in piracy activity in Somalia, and this invites a whole host of international powers, the EU, NATO, to set up what are called combined task force, CTFs. They essentially patrol these areas, and the UN actually gives approval to police areas both in the water and inland. In this environment, Western powers are clearly militarizing this region, but also the Gulf states start to, in terms of naval operations, they contribute to these CTFs, even though they're not part of the EU or NATO. And also they start forging links with paramilitary organizations onshore. So, for example, the UAE starts to pay salaries of Somali security forces. According to one crisis group report, it's estimated that they were paying the salaries of 10,000 Somalis. They delivered a large number of...
These are beyond the people they directly employ, you mean? Or the 10,000 includes their direct employees? Or those security force members become direct employees of DP World?
No, they're Somali security forces, but their salaries are paid by the UAE. And then the UAE was also donating large armored vehicles to Somalia, and especially in their federal states, such as Southwest State, Jubaland, Puntland. Most controversial has been the establishment of the Puntland Maritime Police Force, which was basically on the payroll of the Emiratis. It was established to counter piracy and terrorism. It was in part designed by Eric Prince, and all of this was under the Emirati payroll, and it got out of hand very quickly.
Eric Prince is the founder of Blackwater,
Yeah.
who's a sort of mercenary par excellence or villain par excellence of the last 20 years.
Right, so he found his way to Puntland, this breakaway region of Somalia, and he established this military force which was supposed to counter terrorism and piracy, but basically was only answerable to the presidency. And it employed a bunch of South African apartheid-era officers to help establish the training as well. But things got out of hand. One of them was murdered. And I think the Emiratis really wanted to kind of stay away from this. But essentially what it did was it boosted the proto-state capabilities of these breakaway states, right? So it was ostensibly in the name of countering piracy and terrorism, but essentially what it did was to establish a kind of autonomous presidency. And so within this context, you're having a very militarized region. And so when the war in Yemen breaks out, UAE interests are potentially threatened, and then there's a lot of investments made to strengthen them. And so I don't think we can understand why the war in Yemen followed in the way that it did without understanding this important backdrop.
And so, just to give us a kind of final gloss on this whole issue, maybe you could just sum up for us, what do we think, where do we think this is going? Why is this important for those thinking both about the Middle East and the Horn of Africa?
And about the intersection of private interest with public security policy.
I think that basically if you want to understand what GCC rivalries are going to look like, whether they take place in the rest of the Middle East or in places like the Horn of Africa, you're going to have to look at this confluence of private and public actors, because they don't always... It creates a more messy field than we think. They don't always map onto sort of neat sides. but also they give us an insight into how these conflicts or what these conflicts are going to look like. So, for example, GCC rivalries don't exactly tell us what exactly Somaliland is going to look like in 10 years. It doesn't tell us what Puntland is going to look at 10 years. But if you look at a company like DP World, you know that it's building free trade zones, you know that it's building hospitals, water facilities. It's trying to develop the contours of a state. And so I think analyzing companies like this gives us much more insight into what a future Somaliland or Puntland state might look like, and what their relationships with the federal government of Somalia are going to be as well.
So I guess one day we might have, the ambassador to Somaliland or the ambassador to DP World as a major player. Well, Rohan, thank you so much for your for being on the podcast. And I'm Thanasi Kambanis with Michael Wahid Hanna. Until next time, you've been listening to DCF World Podcast.
Thank you.
DCF World has been brought to you by the Century Foundation, a progressive public policy think tank that seeks to foster opportunity, reduce inequality, and promote security at home and abroad. For more information about our work, please visit tcf.org or follow us on Twitter and Facebook.